Welcome to our presentation on driving modern passwordless authentication using Citrix Workspace and Microsoft Azure Active Directory. My name is Mark Howell. I'm a Senior Product Manager for Citrix, specifically in the HTTX area. And with me in this presentation is Jason Samuel.
Hi, I'm Jason. I'm a technical solutions management security architect at Alchemy Tech Group. I'm the author of jasonsamuel.com, and you can also follow me on Twitter. I'm very active there. I'm also a Citrix CTP. I'm involved in several community programs, and I'm just happy to be here and speak with all of you.
We'll start at the very beginning. Like, how did we end up here? How did Citrix end up speaking at a 502 conference? And it's an interesting story. It started about 2 years ago, so I'll abbreviate it, obviously. But basically, I was handed this opportunity, as you can say, with Windows Hello and 502 using biometrics and things like that. And, because I've been at Citrix for quite a while, my first impression was, okay, so if customers can do this locally, eventually they're going to want to do it virtually, right? So that's kind of how it started. It was so new, there was not a lot of information on how to do it. How do we make this work in a virtual world? So we just kind of plowed through. We went through a few designs. Now, Jason, on the other hand, has been in 502 and authentication for quite a while. And like he said, he's a CTP. So his involvement was like a no-brainer, so I emailed him and say, hey, this is what we got going on. Do you want to help? And he said, yes. So you're in good hands today with what we're about to present. So anyway, I'm going to show you a quick demo. And it happens quickly, right? Like I said, it's 2 minutes long. And but after that, I took some screenshots for you guys to really think about some questions regarding the video, because I think understanding how we're doing it is important. And Jason is going to explain all that and some real world experience as well. So without further ado, let me just show you the demo, and we'll start from there.
At Citrix, we're always looking at new ways to provide a seamless and secure way to access a digital workspace. This video demonstrates a new feature leveraging 502 authentication to provide that seamless but also passwordless authentication into a Citrix workspace. Using the Citrix Cloud and Workspace integration to Microsoft Azure Active Directory as the authentication mechanism, the Citrix Workspace authenticates using 502 through Microsoft Azure Active Directory. Once in the workspace, Citrix Federated Authentication Service federates authentication to the virtual desktop and starts the virtual machine without the need for a password. Now I'm in my virtual desktop. So once I'm in my virtual desktop, our newest 502 feature allows for 502 authentication in the virtual session. I'm going to launch a Chrome browser within my virtual session and navigate to accounts.microsoft.com. So let's go ahead and sign in here. So I'm going to sign in using Windows Hello and facial recognition. It's important to note that none of the components required for 502 are present in a virtual machine. We've developed a way to make those components available to the virtual desktop. Currently, this is supported in the 2009 VDA release, along with Citrix Workspace app for Windows 2009.5. We will support Windows 10 version 1909 and greater to start, but look for more options in the near future.
Okay, so like I said, a quick 2-minute video on, pretty much an end-to-end passwordless experience, from logging into the workspace to, launching a web application in the virtual machine using FIDO2. So one of the first things, that you should really be thinking about is how or why is the Citrix workspace using a Microsoft login? All right, because typically we'll use Active Directory for username and password, right? So that's the very, very first thing you should be like, why is that happening, right? So that's that. Second thing is, how are we invoking Windows Hello or FIDO2, to log into the workspace, right? It's kind of interesting. Like, how is that happening? So that's another question you might want to think about. And then the video showed logging into the FIDO2 virtual machine without any credentials, right? So is Workspace using SSO, or how is that doing that, right? And Jason will explain that in detail. Okay, so finally, FIDO2 in a virtual session is good, except that in a virtual session, none of the components for FIDO2 are there, right? So you don't have Windows Hello facial recognition, fingerprints, or PIN. You don't have a TPM, which is a threat protection module. So how are we doing that? Because if you compare that to like a virtual physical machine, you'll see that you have Windows Hello facial recognition, fingerprint, PIN. You have a threat protection module. Pretty much everything you expect to have on a physical machine, right? So, which FIDO2 takes advantage of. However, it's not there on a virtual machine. So how are we doing that? That's pretty important. And then, so those are just some of the images that I, captured for you, because like I said, you don't have the time to think about exactly what you want to, worry about or ask Jason and or me during the, question and answer. But anyway, with that said, I'm going to turn it over now to Jason Samuel, and he's going to finish up the presentation for us.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm going to get into the configuration and real-world info. I just want to show you some of the behind the scenes on what you saw in Mark's video, as well as talk about some of the lessons learned and takeaways that I've come across deploying this. So first off, how has the technology progressed? Well, since 2019, I've assisted several Fortune 100 companies implement modern passwordless with the Citrix Workspace and Azure AD using FIDO2 keys. And I've written and presented about this technology on my website, different community forums and user groups and webinars. And I can tell you, having worked with this so long now, the actual technology works great. FIDO2 plus Citrix plus Azure AD, there's no gotchas, there's no blockers, the technology works. I've done POCs that have lasted maybe a day, 2 days, maybe a week at most, and then immediately after that, it tends to go into pilot or production. The reason being that it is so very easy to deploy. And then the second reason is that it is more of an additive form of authentication. It's not taking anything away that you might already be running, it's just adding a new type of authentication method. And so for those reasons, it's very fast to deploy. Now, this combination actually provides passwordless authentication into and inside the session, just as Mark showed in his video. Users tend to love this flexibility just because it's one authentication method that they can use repeatedly, no matter if it's a virtual machine or if it's a physical machine. Now, behind the scenes, the first thing that you saw Mark do with the workspace was actually authenticate against Azure AD. Well, in Citrix Workspace, in the online portal, there's a configuration option to choose your identity provider. And all you have to do is select the Azure Active Directory radio button. It's literally one button. You click on that, you set that up, and it's done. That's all it takes for Workspace to start using Azure AD. then within Azure AD itself, you have to enable FIDO2 authentication for your users. It is not on by default. It's in the authentication methods section, and you can target specific user groups, or you can target your entire company, however you want to roll it out. Once that's been enabled for the user, they have to go to the security info portal. The security info portal resides in Azure. It is the end user facing portal where you can set up things like Authenticator, but you can also add FIDO2 keys. All the user has to do is log in, hit add method, and then begin the flow to actually add their keys. Once they've done that, they can begin using passwordless authentication with that FIDO2 key to log into anything protected with Azure AD. Now, I do want to say that most users will probably add 2 to 3 keys, but us as IT practitioners, we tend to test a variety of different keys from different manufacturers or form factors, like I do, and you can see there in my screenshot. Right now, there is a limitation of 10 keys per account. So if you try and add an 11th key, it's going to tell you to delete one of your keys. So just something to keep in mind if you are testing a volume of keys. The benefits with these keys is that a user can use that same key not only for their regular account, but for IT folks, we can use that same key for our privileged accounts. So accounts that we use for elevated access to administer systems, remote into sensitive computer systems and programs, whatever it is that you have. You can now use that exact key, that one key, for all of that. Additionally, you can use the same key within multiple Azure AD tenants. So you might have a test tenant, a production tenant, or you might have a business partner's Azure AD tenant that you leverage, that you log into. Well, that one key can actually be used across all those. The other thing that we're seeing now is that as FIDO2 and WebAuthn start to take off across the internet, a lot of the personal services that we use can now also use that single key. So not only is your personal life and your enterprise life all protected with passwordless, it's all protected with that one key through all of this. Now, the magical part about this whole thing is that when the virtual desktop launched, you did not see a Windows login page. It simply SSO'd you right on through, single signed you in. What that magic is Citrix Federated Authentication Service, also known as FAS. What FAS is basically, in a nutshell, is a middleman that takes modern web authentication like Azure AD, which is OpenID Connect based, or it can take SAML, any type of modern web auth, and it converts it into something that the Windows operating system understands. Traditionally, Windows has understood two things: username and password, or certificate, usually in the form of a smart card or something like that. Now, additional credential providers are being added to Windows 10. We're seeing that happen. But what FAS is doing actually is basically talking as a middleman to your Microsoft CAs and generating a just-in-time certificate and slipstreaming that in as the virtual desktop or virtual app launches. So once you've logged in with a passwordless authentication, once you launch that virtual desktop, at that moment, just in time, a certificate is slipstreamed in and it does the SSO seamlessly. So the user just ends up at their desktop. You don't see any flashes or anything like that. The user doesn't get slowed down. It's a very, very seamless experience, as Mark showed in his video. I do want to point out that it is very easy to configure. However, it does usually require some assistance from your security team. The reason being that most Citrix teams, the Citrix administrators, don't have access to Microsoft CA. So there is a little bit of work to do with each other just to make sure that this gets deployed successfully. Now, I want to talk about the passwordless authentication strategy. What Microsoft was telling your CISO pre-COVID was to go pretty much slow and steady. It's slow steps. First, develop a passwordless replacement offering, then reduce the visible password surface area, and then 3, get into that transition into the password deployment, which is what we're talking about here today. Well, COVID happened and the world pretty much changed all around us, and our IT organization changed all around us. And we're pretty much, if we were trying to go that slow and steady route, we're now on a rocket going forward, and our leadership is saying, hey, do step 3 yesterday. So this has become a little bit of a problem, but it is actually quite easy to get to that level 3 very quickly. And I'm going to show you some of that today. So some real world tips from the field to help you get there. And those are actually my FIDO2 keys that I like to test with all the things that I'm showing you today. right now, you have to understand that Windows Hello for Business is also a FIDO2 certified platform authenticator. So usually that comes up in conversations. What can we do with that laptop's fingerprint reader or IR camera? And you can do passwordless with that. That's absolutely fine. But for unmanaged devices or mobile devices and so on, you have to use Microsoft Authenticator or the FIDO2 security keys. So that's where that use case really starts to shine. What I've noticed is that users do like the combination of having that platform authenticator, having that built into their laptop, plus that external authenticator. In fact, I recommend that in your company, if you're going to deploy passwordless, deploy all three of these options, because that's going to cover every use case that comes across in your organization. There probably won't be a use case that you can't answer if you actually deploy all three of these. Now, I've also noticed that localized biometrics is favored over PIN by most users. Users are already kind of accustomed to Windows Hello for Business with their fingerprint reader or their IR camera. And when you're talking about putting in something with a PIN, it kind of breaks that experience. Even in their personal lives on their mobile devices, we're using Face ID or Touch ID, and you're using a biometric there. So it almost becomes an expectation that any type of authenticator that you give to your users would have some kind of biometric in place. Now, several of the keys out there support biometrics. I am seeing a lot of traction there for those. So, and I do know that several companies are coming out with their own biometric options where they don't have one right now. So definitely take a look at the biometric options. I think they are going to be a little bit easier and well received by your users. Now, as far as the form factors, USB-A has been very popular. It's just a port that everybody has, USB-C as well. NFC is certainly gaining traction, especially thanks to Google and Apple for what they've been doing with their OSs. And even me in that picture, you can see that I have an HID reader there, the Omni key, and that works with the C2300 smart card / FIDO2 key. I use that quite a bit. And it actually works with any of those NFC readers, NFC keys that you see in that screenshot. There's a few others there, like the FATN all-in-one pass. And I'm seeing that to be kind of like the easier way to get in, where you just kind of tap and then you go. It's really nice. So I do see that also working more with mobile devices for some of you that have been testing that. It's a nicer experience to have NFC. Now, BLE, Bluetooth Low Energy, is also pretty nice. It's for wireless conference rooms. That's where I've had those conversations. Now, post-COVID, it's not that important, not that top of mind for people, but it is really nice because it is like having a garage door opener for your computer. I literally have a computer that's 10 feet away from me, and I put my thumb on this, and that's how I log in. It's very easy to do. Now, things to be prepared for as far as conversations that you're going to have inside your organization. Education. You start talking about FIDO2, people are going to be like, what the heck is this USB dock thing you're telling me that I need to deploy? And they've never heard of it. So you're going to have to kind of go over, what this is, why it's a standard, how this works with W3C, how all these organizations that are backing this technology in this open standard, and where the state of the industry is at. You're going to have these conversations. So it really starts with education within your organization. The second thing that I've seen around this is that analysis paralysis, the fear of impacting a critical application that does not support modern authentication. This is actually where Citrix Workspace and Azure AD can really help you overcome, because if you have a 30-year-old application running in your organization, a Windows application, or if it's the latest and greatest brand new application that came out last week, you can deliver that through Citrix. And it doesn't matter if it understands modern auth or not, because Citrix Workspace on the front end is being protected with Azure AD and using passwordless. And then after that, FAS takes over and performs that SSO piece into the remote system, whether it be in a data center, a private data center, or in the cloud. It's going to deliver that Windows application and the desktop without the need for them to actually understand modern authentication. So, definitely move forward. There's no reason to overanalyze, just start using it. The other thing that I've seen happen is that these keys are usually about $20 to $50 on average. So in a COVID world, a lot of organizations are trying to cut their budgets, trying to do the free thing first. And with Windows Hello for Business, it's a platform authenticator. So you have it they're on the device. You've already invested in that. And then you have Microsoft Authenticator phone sign-in, which is, there's really no cost to that. And then really what I've seen is that there are some use cases where neither of those are going to work, and that's where the budget for FIDO2 usually ends up opening up again. Usually it's like a business unit or something that needs a certain number of keys, and so you purchase it, and then the other business units start seeing the value, and then it starts to just proliferate within your environment. So, be prepared to have those cost conversations. The other thing that I've seen is remote onboarding. How do you proof up a user into strong authentication when they aren't in the office anymore? It used to be that you could show your passport or your driver's license, and that's how you get your credentials on your first day. But these days we're moving away from password, and it's trust-based, and there's nothing being put on the key that you would need to wipe. Another conversation that tends to come up is that you don't really pre-enroll these keys. In IT, we used to enroll people in certain tokens and then send it off to them. Well, FIDO2 is very user-centric. The administrator doesn't really get involved. It's actually very self-service, and it's very user-centric to where they establish a trust and not the IT organization. So just keep that in mind. It is probably going to change some of these things when you start, some of the things that you have established in your organization, those processes may have to change to adopt this more user-centric flow. Now, as far as where the FIDO2 key fits in the organization, most common use cases I've solved with this combination of using a FIDO2 key and then Citrix plus Azure AD is that the company needs unphishable auth with high identity assurance to make sure that the user is who they really say they are. Another one is that companies that are moving away from X509 certificates, like smart cards, for example, and need to have a better form factor, especially in this age where everybody's using phones and tablets and prefers to be very mobile if they can be. And using those Thursby cases, those big cases that you stick your phone or your iPad in, and then trying to slide a smart card into there, it's very cumbersome, right? So we want to move away from that, and that's where this kind of gets you into a modern passwordless very quickly. Another one that's come up before is that users not allowed to have smartphones because they're on a high security floor. Sometimes if you have a mobile device on that particular floor, that can be a potential vector for data exfil or potentially tampering. With or without the user's knowledge, there are certain things you can do with an electronic device when they're on the floor. And this is one way, just preventing these electronic devices from being on the floor is one layer of security. And with a FIDO2 key, you don't have to worry about that because, again, there's no CPU or anything on there. It's just a trust mechanism to authenticate with. So that is a way to be able to get to modern auth in these high security environments. Another one that I solve for all the time, users with poor LTE connectivity, whether it be on land or at sea. There are parts or just within the United States, for example, where there is really no coverage. And so to be able to authenticate and securely without that LTE connection, you can use your FIDO2 key. Another one is like rigs and shipping vessels. I've done quite a bit there as well, where you've got a satellite connection and it's spotty. I mean, it's not really the best thing to get a signal across, like with an authenticator phone sign-in flow. So that's where a FIDO2 key can really come in handy. Now, one last one that I've come across is on manufacturing floors. They need something rugged environment ready. I have to be honest, a lot of the FIDO2 keys that I've tested, they are plastic. There are a few metal ones that I've tested, but I've seen ones like this smart card based one where a user might have it on their chest as a company badge or on their hip or around their neck or something. These really do hold up very well. So it's another use case that may come up for you. Now, as far as what key to get, there are so many manufacturers, and you've probably heard from a lot of them today and throughout this conference. These are some of the keys that I've personally used, and I'm testing a bunch more that I have here coming up shortly. They all work really well. At the end of the day, you got to look at which company and which form factors that would work for your organization. Just please keep in mind that you need to look for that FIDO2 logo. It has to be FIDO2 certified. As long as it's a FIDO2 certified key, it's going to work with Citrix Workspace and it's going to work with Azure AD. Some of these companies may have the older FIDO U2F, Universal Second Factor, which is meant for password plus using the key as a second factor to authenticate with. That is not passwordless. So, please keep in mind that you need to purchase a FIDO2 key and not FIDO U2F, and you'll be in good shape. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining our session. If you have any questions, we'll be sticking around to help answer them. Thank you again.